Hey, how's it going? Keith Townsend. And I have my friend Alex Ellis again. And we're going to talk about something that's really, I don't want to call it niche, because when he first came to me with the concepts of Inlets and Inlets Pro, I kind of thought to myself, that's a nightmare. I would never want that from a uh, network administrator, network security perspective. But Alex has poured a lot of time and energy into the project and now product that I thought it'd be willing to share. Alex, first, what is Inlets and Inlets Pro?
Well, I guess people are probably quite curious now that you've said you'd never want that from a network perspective, a security perspective. And what is the reason you wouldn't want that?
Because because you're a developer, and I don't want developers doing anything with networking like that. I want to control. I'm a traditional IT person, and I want to control my virtual four walls of my data center. And Inlets lets developers bypass those four walls.
Right.
However, I thought of it as a solution that developers brought, but developers really don't do this sort of thing operational. This is more of an operational tool than I think it is a developer tool.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. So why would you be worried about inlets and what does it do? It creates a network connection from a computer inside a private network to a computer on a public network, at which point you can then send traffic to that public network or IP address and it will be routed to the private one. And it can penetrate most corporate network conditions, and so it can work behind a captive firewall. You can go into a cafe, order your Starbucks, let's say, deploy OpenFaaS or some other Kubernetes application, and have an IP address on the internet that anyone can access. You can then go home and plug that in on your home network, on your Wi-Fi, and it will still be up with the same IP address, the same link. And that's quite powerful. It's not the first time that we've seen it done. There are other solutions like ngrok, which is a SaaS product. It's quite limited in what you can get, even if you pay. There's Argo Tunnel from Cloudflare. If you're a Cloudflare customer, with your domain registered with them and your DNS managed by them. But if you're not, you can't really use it. And so Inlets was this thing that I put together because I needed to self-host it. I needed to be able to access it behind corporate conditions and for things that were part of our development workflow. But you're right. Since then, it's actually taken on more of a sort of, I guess, service mesh type use case, where we're looking at a IT administrator like a Keith Townsend with his own data center, where is yours hosted?
And QTS in Chicago.
In Chicago, who perhaps doesn't have any public IP addresses or ingress, or perhaps is running an enterprise application like an old vSphere server, and you want some way of securely tunneling that API to an Amazon EKS cluster in a region near Chicago, so that you can run, I don't know, Kubernetes applications that automate and talk to that as on-premises vSphere API.
So the way that I do that today is that I have a firewall. I have a direct connect between my data center and AWS. I pay $800 a month for that port. I also pay an additional $1,000 for my internet connectivity. And then I pay AWS direct connect charges for the actual direct connect port. So uh, the use case, if it was just this thing that I was using that connectivity for, would cost me roughly about $2,100 a month.
Yeah.
So this sounds
Effectively,
like if I could just leverage just my internet connection, and if I only had this, not even this, because I can do more than one inlets tunnel. If I wanted to do from a VM into a into an AWS service itself, I could do that. Because you mentioned service mesh, I wrote this blog post, and when me and you talked about it, uh, uh, almost a couple of years ago, in which I had this scenario, and I wrote this up when I kind of had a HashiCorp type service mesh solution to the problem using console. Was what if I had a Lambda function and I wanted that Lambda function to talk to a VM in my data center, but I only wanted to limit that activity in that session, but my firewall logic doesn't allow for that to happen because
Yeah.
Lambda is a headless service. Does this help to solve that
I
problem?
mean, to some degree it can. I mean, in your specific use case, you want a Lambda function to talk to, let's say it was a Windows VM running on premises, running MS SQL, and you had a lot of data in there and you just can't migrate it. But you need to run a weekly report. Maybe you run it from the Lambda function and push it into S3 when it's done. If you run Lambda in a VPC, you could run an EC2 instance in the VPC as well, and then you could run an Inlets tunnel there and have it connected up, and they'll be able to talk to each other. Now, the other use case is not so much what we're talking about here, this hybrid cloud for service providers. For enterprise companies, it's more for service providers. So let's say you're a CodeFresh type service, you're providing CI/CD on a public cloud. It's a complete SaaS. There's nothing that customers can run. But then you need them to start running a bit of software so that you can punch in and you can run, I don't know, jobs on their existing servers. Again, this is where it becomes interesting, is that even though you've got no way of getting into their network, if you use Inlets, Inlets Pro, you can dial back into the control plane and then access those private servers from that public control plane.
So I could, as a service provider, I could use this as a call home feature. So if I'm managing a storage array, some control plane inside of a private data center, and I want to send log files back securely back to a centralized service, I could use that. I can use Inlets Pro to do exactly that.
You could, but where it becomes more interesting, I think, is where there's a control plane that wants to manage and update state inside a private cluster somewhere. There's a company, you see them on the Inlets homepage, called Vision, and they work with a lot of regulated customers in Switzerland, so talking banks, and they can't have their OpenShift API public. Just wouldn't make sense.
Right.
But they want Vision to be able to provide a management for their OpenShift clusters, to be able to dial in, check the health, adjust settings, do upgrades. They do that by running a number of Inlet server processes on their SaaS, and then they configure the customer site to use an Nginx client and dial back. From
So
then,
literally, I could use this to create a managed service around managing my VMware host. So
yeah,
if I wanted, if I wanted someone outside of my organization to manage VMware hosts, or if I wanted to build a service, and this is from the, let me switch my hats and put on a service provider perspective, and I wanted a universal way to manage 100 different customers, VMware vCenter environments. This is a packaged way in order to do that repeatedly. I'm not creating Snowflake VPN sessions. Hey, you know what, customer A, B, or C, send me what VPN concentrator you have. Let's establish a VPN.
yeah.
Let's establish rules, etc. This is a set of rules or controls that are easily deployed and easily audible, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, it's a kind of SD-WAN, right? So SD-WAN-lite is a good way of looking at Inlets and Inlets Pro. Now, the open source version needs you to go and add TLS to its WebSocket, and it needs you to only use HTTP traffic, like REST APIs. But the Pro edition automates the public key infrastructure for that. It adds the TLS encryption, and it also gives you the ability to do TCP traffic, so level 4. I've got a database and I want to talk to it. I've got a medical protocol that doesn't have any encryption, but I need to punch it across to this other network to orchestrate it. And that's the kind of thing that you can do.
So, okay, I'm hearing the open source version, which is Inlets, the Inlets project. Then there's a pro service. So I have to ask the question, how much does this cost? Because I'm a service provider and I'm really interested in this, or I have this use case. It's the CTO advisor, and I just want this. I want to get rid of this direct connect cost because functionally I don't need this big heavy overhead. I just need point solutions. How much is this costing me?
I think this goes back to the question of is Kubernetes right for us? And again, I'd want to spend some time and see if Inlets was the right solution or Inlets Pro. There was a company I did a proof of concept with, and we got sort of so far into it and realized that they needed a feature that we were never going to add to the project, right? And not just for them. And so I advised someone on an alternative solution. And that's the benefit of actually having an expert that you can speak to about the solution rather than just being sold something and being on your own. There's 3 tiers. There's a personal tier for people that want to play around the Raspberry Pi cluster or run Kubernetes on their laptop. There's a small business tier that comes with 5 tunnels and commercial support. An enterprise tier where we can sort of work out what fits your budget and your needs and has some additional management around it as well. Now, here's something that's interesting. The open source version can benefit from a paid control plane. So whilst we're looking at Inlets and Inlets Pro as 2 different proxies with 2 different capabilities, you can take the free version and automate it, and you could spend 3 months writing the code to do that and maintaining it in your team and think about what that will cost you. Or you can come and get that from us, from the vendor, where we're constantly updating it, adding features to it. And so you can use the free version that will effectively, it scales very well on a price basis. We'll then have that management control plane as something that's supported and built for you, has a REST API, could potentially scale your tunnels to 0 when they're not in use. And that's where I think sort of an interesting model, right? You can have an open tunnel, you have a closed tunnel, you can build your own management control plane for either, or you can come and get one from us.
So speaking of coming and get one from you, how do we find the project in the product?
Yes, so it's simply inlets.dev, that's it, or search for Inlets online. And there's lots of documentation, there's blog posts, there's videos, there's a community, there's Slack around this as well. So you're not just paying, let's say if you bought your personal license, certain amount of money per month just to get a tunnel. You're paying for all those other things. You're paying for the open source automation that can set you up an exit server in 2 seconds on Amazon or 20 seconds on DigitalOcean or wherever it may be. It's a whole package.
Well, Alex, thanks again for joining the program. Where can people find you online?
Alex Ellis IO is probably the best place to go. And then you've got all of my other links from there, Twitter, LinkedIn, the works.
All right, that's it for this episode of the CTO Advisor. You want to find me online. I'm at CTO Advisor on Twitter. That is the best place to interact directly with me. DMs are open. You want to find the company's website is thectoadvisor.com. Talk to you next CTO Dose.